Welcome to the History Docket. Stranger, I am Percival Whitmore, Professor of History. It seems you have wandered into my study. Well, it is pouring out there. You might as well join me here. Make yourself comfortable, perhaps with a cup of tea. I'm currently reading the memoirs of Pyotr Wrangel, the Black Baron. Oh? You're not sure who he is? Well, it is my day off, but perhaps I could provide you with a brief and simplified lecture. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. In the chaos that followed the Russian revolutions of 1917, one man would emerge as the last serious hope for the anti-Bolshevik cause in southern Russia. A charismatic commander, a true Russian patriot, and lord of exile, Baron Pyotr Nikolaevich Wrangel. A man who dared to challenge the wildfire of communism that spread across Russia. Pyotr Wrangel was born on August 15, 1878. New style, August 27th. In Novo-Alexandrovsk, Kovno Governorate, then the Russian Empire, now in Lithuania. His family was part of the Baltic German nobility, carrying a long tradition of military service. In his youth, Wrangel studied mining, enrolling in the St. Petersburg Mining Institute in 1896, graduating in 1901. Although trained in engineering, Wrangel was drawn to the military. He volunteered for service, became an officer in 1902, and during the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, distinguished himself serving with the Transbaikal Cossack units. When World War I broke out in 1914, Wrangel served with distinction. He earned awards for bravery and showed strong leadership, especially in cavalry operations. Wrangel, as a leader, was keen on staying relevant and respected by his fellow soldiers, especially the officers that reported to him. In his memoirs, Always with Honor, Wrangel shares stories of camaraderie and brotherly bonds that soar beyond rankings and formalities. This key leadership trait would allow him to wield great influence in the future. A true leader assimilates with his subordinates, understanding their psychology and making decisions accordingly. By 1917, the old order was crumbling. The February Revolution deposed Tsar Nicholas II. The provisional government took over, but chaos spread. Wrangel was uneasy with the changes. However, he acknowledged the needed reform of Tsar Nicholas II's court. When General Lava Kornilov's attempted coup against the provisional government failed, Wrangel resigned his commission. In Petrograd during this time, Wrangel witnessed an intriguing shift in Russian society, one that is a hallmark of an eroding culture. He describes one instance where he walked the streets of Petrograd, and there was a great chaos with robbery, assault, and more occurring at random, with little to no resistance, and often perpetrated by those loyal to the rising Bolshevik party. He entered a theater, only to find a wealth of people peacefully watching a film reel seemingly without a care. This stark contrast of culture and morality during hardship stayed with him for the rest of his days. Wrangel eventually left the Imperial Army and went to Crimea. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks finally seized power in Petrograd. Civil war erupted between the Red Army and various anti-Bolshevik forces, collectively known as the White Movement. At this time, Wrangel could see the situation was no longer something he could watch from afar, and joined the Anticommunist White Army, a collection of various ideologies in sharp opposition to communism. Wrangel distinguished himself in operations in the Caucasus and the southern fronts. In the summer of 1919, during Denikin's offensive, Wrangel captured Tsaritsyn, later known as Stalingrad, now Volgograd. This feat was at the time hailed as the army's greatest victory, and was an ode to Wrangel's brilliant command, utilizing armored trains to break through Red Army lines and support infantry. However, the high of victory would not last, as the Whites began to falter under General Anton Denikin's leadership. Unlike Pyotr Wrangel, who advocated for incremental and unified offensives, Denikin was determined to rush Moscow as quickly as possible in order to continuously weaken the Soviets. The key problem with this strategy is one, the Southern White Army had lost their numbers in the following weeks after capturing Tsaritsyn, and secondly, the Reds controlled a swath of Russia's industrial heart, making replenishing troops quick and effective. Denikin and Wrangel's disagreement is often seen as the turning point of disaster for the White Army, with Denikin finally firing Wrangel from his post after Wrangel released a scathing open letter ridiculing Denikin for his reckless leadership. Wrangel obediently resigned, however soon he would be called up to leadership yet again. Anton Denikin resigned in April 1920 after crushing losses, and Wrangel assumed command of the White forces in the south, now reorganized as the Russian Army, often called Wrangel's Army. Wrangel attempted reforms intended to broaden popular support. In Crimea, he implemented land reforms. Peasants could claim land from large landlords by giving a portion of their crop, a step aimed at undercutting support for the Bolsheviks among the rural population. He also maintained impeccable relations with the Cossack nations, something that allowed him to utilize them as cavalry and pad the army's numbers. Wrangel also regulated the army to outlaw looting and razing of villages, something that had been allowed under Denikin and weakened the trust of the common people in the White Army. However admirable his reforms, his strategic position remained precarious. In mid-1920, he launched an offensive in Ukraine, hoping to break the Bolshevik hold. Despite temporary successes, the Red Army's numerical superiority and strategic advantages began to tell. Late in 1920, the White position collapsed. Despite brilliant defensive blockades using the natural marsh and barriers of Crimea, the decisive siege of Perekop in November succeeded for the Red forces, cutting off Crimea from support. Realizing resistance was no longer viable, Wrangel ordered the evacuation of soldiers and civilians from Crimea between November 13th and November 16th, 1920. Over 145,000 people were transported by a fleet of ships to Constantinople. Wrangel ensured that he would be the last to board, while some regiments and soldiers chose to stay and fight to the death. Within days of evacuation, the remaining soldiers met terrible fates, particularly the captured ones. The White movement lost its last major stronghold, and the Bolsheviks consolidated control. After the evacuation, Wrangel lived in exile. He settled first in Constantinople, later in the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, eventually to be Yugoslavia. There he worked to organize Russian émigré communities and preserve what remained of the White military tradition. In September 1924, he was instrumental in founding the Russian All-Military Union, ROVS, an organization meant to unite white Russian exiles and maintain readiness for a possible future struggle. On April 25, 1928, Pyotr Wrangel died in Brussels after mysteriously falling ill at the age of 48. Many members of his household suspected assassination by poisoning. However, it could only be speculation. His body was later reburied in Belgrade, in the Church of the Holy Trinity, per his wishes. Wrangel was in many ways the most capable, disciplined, and ideologically consistent leader among the White commanders. His land reforms, his efforts at maintaining order among his forces, and his willingness to adapt made him respected, even by some opponents. Wrangel faced impossible odds, a lack of resources, insufficient foreign support, an exhausted population, and a Red Army growing in strength and experience. What is certain, in defeat, Wrangel did not lose his resolve. His legacy lives on in émigré communities, in the annals of the Russian Civil War, and in the memory of those who saw him as the last real standard-bearer of the old order, a symbol of Russian defiance against Bolshevik influence at any cost. Ah, look at the time. I must return to work. I have more mini-lectures available to you on the History Docket channel, Stranger. Goodbye for now.